Now, I have in studio with me Nigel Morgan. He's the chairman of Focus Africa Foundation. His job, to stop the killing of rhinos in the Kruger National Park. And to this end, he's been operating an intelligence team on the ground since March 2013. In early June, his operation was summarily terminated by the board of SandParks following his company's bust of the Chinese Triad Syndicate on the 23rd of May, which was conducted by the Hawks after his intelligence team provided them with the relevant information. These Chinese Triad characters were valuing and shipping rhino horn, ivory and abalone. No reason was given for Nigel's company's termination. It was rumoured that they got too close to the people operating the trade at the top. Now, Nigel, good morning to you.
Good morning, Tamara.
Now, how much is this business worth annually, given that 1,006 were killed last year?
Should we start with some statistics?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. Look, 25,000 of the world's estimated 29,000 rhinos are in Africa. And just under 20,000 of these are in South Africa, of which 18,000 odd are the white rhinos and 2,000 the rarer black. So well over half the world's rhinos are in South Africa.
Okay.
And the majority of these in the Kruger National Park, which is about 9,800 of which are the endangered black rhinos.
Okay.
90% of the rhino poaching taking place in South Africa is taking place in the Kruger National Park. That's the epicenter of what we refer to as the Rhino War.
Yes.
Now, the problem started in about 2008. Prior to that, in 2006, only 36 rhinos were poached in South Africa, and the following year was less than 50 again. The problem really kicked in 2009 with a figure of about 122, and then it rose rapidly after that. 333 in 2010, 448 2011, 668 2012, and then 1,004 last year. This year is shaping up to be even worse, with 370 already killed in the Kruger National Park and another 211 elsewhere in South Africa. That gives us a total of 581.
So far.
That means by the end of the year we're going to be looking at least 1,100, if not more. And this is a disaster. It's a disaster for the Kruger National Park, it's a disaster for South Africa, and it's a disaster for those who have fought for years to protect endangered species.
Disaster for the world, actually, because it's everyone's loss, isn't it?
Yes.
Tell me, rhino horn is fetching an extraordinary amount of money. Can you just unpack those figures for us?
Yes, I
in comparison to, say, gold, cocaine,
Right, Tamara, here we go. It's fetching between $65,000 to $90,000 per kilogram in the marketplace in Hanoi or Beijing. It's more valuable than gold, which is about $43,000, and cocaine, which is about $20,000 a kilo. Now, a single horn, they obviously vary with the age of the animal, is roughly about 3.5 kilograms. So that horn is worth $65,000. At $65,000, sorry, that's worth $227,000. Okay, that's over 2 million rand.
And SandPark stores rhino horn?
Yeah. Let me just before that add that if you take the number of rhinos killed last year, the street value in Hanoi, Beijing, was about 228 million. And that was the question you started out with.
It's big business.
It's big business, killing KNP rhinos.
So clearly the war that's being fought is being lost. Nigel.
It's being lost. It's being lost. And we can go into the reasons for that probably later in the program.
Yes.
But you asked the question about how much there is in the stores. About 20 tons in SandPark stores. That'll be about 12 tons in KNP and about 8 in KwaZulu-Natal. If we still take the lower figure of $65,000, that's 1.3 billion, or more than 10 billion rands worth of rhino horn sitting there in the stores.
$1.3 billion.
$1.3 billion, more than 10 billion rand.
Okay, in our stores right now.
Yes, that's SANParks, but that doesn't allow for the rhino horns that's been stored elsewhere in the country, in the private parks.
And quite a lot of inside jobs, people, those horns being stolen.
Yes, well, there was a hit on a store in Mpumalanga about 5 or 6 weeks ago. It looked like an inside job. I think the public have been told about 40 horns disappeared, but it's probably the figure was nearer 70 or 80, but I'm afraid the government's not been very communicative on it.
Nigel, you wanted to sort of comment about how many rhino horn were stolen.
Yes, tomorrow. I think I misled you there. My colleague Joe Vanderbilt has just texted me through. He's our operations director. And he says it's 112 horns were stolen from the Mpumalanga stores.
Yes, okay. So now, just tell us, why are we losing this war so roundly?
Well, I think fundamentally it's a lack of political will. The government is more interested, and maybe people will argue this more correctly, interested in education, housing, basic services, land distribution, and they're not applying their minds to this problem. There's a lack of strategy. There's a lack of resources, which is strange given the amount of international organizations that are contributing to this, to trying to save the rhinos. Other factors.
So where is the money going to, Nigel?
That's a good question. There are about 160 organisations who say they're raising money for rhinos. What I've got to tell you is the guys on the ground, we don't see much of it. When we started on a 3-year contract at KNP, they ran out of money after 3 months.
Really?
And we carried on, and we were able to find money from a philanthropic American, who's well known, and we were able to continue. But it does, it poses a question.
So where is
all this money going? It's not. There is a lack of resources at KNP to fight this war, and it's a mystery where the money's going.
Okay. Can we? I mean, there is somebody who's been getting quite a wad of a salary, isn't there? Sort of in terms of.
Yes. Now you're trying to be controversial.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, where is this money going? And SANParks needs to ask itself some of these questions, and the government needs to be asking. Now, let's take the fundraiser appointed by the board of SANParks on a salary of 95,000 rands a month, approximately 10 times what a senior ranger who's risking his life out there every day gets. This fellow also got merit awards over a period of June of last year to April of this year.
What constitutes a merit?
Well, this is a question that maybe SANParks would like to answer. Of rands, 1.481 million. So, over a period of 11 months, this gentleman received a salary of 1.3 million with merits awards added up. It comes to 2.8 million rand. Now,
and he's been put in charge of?
And
what is his job?
His job is fundraising from donors and philanthropists. And the month that the Warren Buffett Foundation donated 225 million rand, this guy, coincidentally perhaps, this was March of this year, gets 1 million into his account. Some would say this is vomiting on the feet of the donors.
Okay. And
questions should be asked about what SANParks board thinks it's doing.
Now, just going on, 47 poachers were killed in the Kruger National Park. Is that this last year?
Yes.
Now, as the kill rates for poachers go up, their tactics are changing, aren't they? What's happening now?
Yeah. Let's first of all say, this is not just about the loss of endangered species. This is about the loss of life, unnecessary loss of life. That's 47 families who've lost somebody. Most of those will be Mozambicans from poor villages along the Kruger National Park, Mozambique border. And they're being exploited by the syndicates. Yes, the tactics change. The groups, infiltrating groups, will be needed, normally 3 to 4. There'll be a professional hunter, often ex-military, and he'll have support of 2 probably young Mozambicans, one carrying water, food, and the other one carrying an axe. And increasing as the battle gets more bitter, we're seeing a 4th with an AK-47. That is not a hunting rifle. That is for killing people. And, huge credit needs to be paid to General Johan Juster, who directs special operations at Kruger National Park, and his team of just under 400 rangers. Those rangers are risking their lives every day to try and keep the casualty rates of the rhinos down. And they should be the ones getting the money, and not the fat cats sitting in the Pretoria head office of SANParks.
Okay. Nigel, who is going to benefit from the failure of the conservation of the rhino?
Well, first of all, for a limited period of time, the syndicates who are involved in it, the politicians they're paying off, and the corrupt officials who are also getting their share. But it's not going to go on for long, because unlike the drug war, which will be infinite, the Rhino War is finite. The tipping point is coming. If it isn't there already, it'll be there according to the World Wildlife Fund by next year. We're going to have more rhinos being killed than are being born, and that we are then on the road to the extinction of the rhino in public parks. They'll only exist in zoos and in well-defended private parks mostly. And that would be a tragedy for one of the finest parks in the world, the Kruger National Park.
Yeah. Is farming an option? I know that you and I were sort of at a panel discussion earlier on in the week about this subject, and somebody rushed up to me and sort of gave me a card, and it seemed that he advocates farming. Why would that not work, or do you think it would work? Would it sort of knock the price of rhino horn and make it less attractive to go out and kill these beasts?
Well, the gentleman concerned, who we won't name, is on the board of SANParks. It's a rather extraordinary position to take for SANParks, but it appears that this goes higher. The Department of Environmental Affairs recently issued an invitation to stakeholders to participate in its exploration of a rhino horn trade feasibility study, saying that it was authorized by the Cabinet last year to explore the feasibility of South African tabling a proposal for the legislation of commercial international trade in rhino horn. And a panel of experts has apparently been established to assist the Cabinet in its deliberations. Well, one might just add that the trade in rhino horn is outlawed by the United Nations Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, known as CITES.
Okay.
And one has to say that the South African government is going to face a maelstrom of negative publicity from the international wildlife bodies like the World Wildlife Fund if they continue in this direction. Many years ago, Tamara, when I was at the Centre for Policy Studies in London, and we had a minister who stupidly insisted upon making a decision which we knew was unwise, we'd say to him, "Minister, brave decision." And then we open a book on how long he'd last before the press slaughtered him, and Mrs. Thatcher handbagged him, and he found himself on the back benches in the House of Commons again. And I would say for the minister that she needs to apply her mind to what she's getting herself into, or on the advice of her panel of experts. Because I don't see much of the world supporting the idea of opening a trade in rhino horn.
Is it governable? I mean, it would be government run, would it?
It would if it was limited to places like Norway and Sweden and Denmark. I don't see it happening in Africa. Take a good look, and I did because I was involved in the Congo, DRC, with this Kimberley process. The Kimberley process ends up as a fig leaf for the same bad behaviour in the diamond industry. And it originates around certificates of origin. And these are easily obtained through bribery of government officials. So what it does, you end up legalizing the grey and black market. And I don't, look, with rhino horn, there's such a limited amount of it. If you took drugs and said, right, let's open a market in drugs, yes, you collapse the price because there's an almost infinite supply of drugs to meet that demand. Lots of people would die, but you'd certainly put the syndicates out of business. How are you going to do that with rhino horn? There's just this finite supply. What are they really up to? Is it really that they want to get their hands on that money, on the 20 tons in the stores, worth about $1.3 billion? And do we really trust the government to spend that money correctly in the interests of endangered species? Okay. Or do we expect more Nicandlers?
Okay. Well, I want to sort of say to you, Nigel, that it really is a social aspect to all of this. I've been sent a new book, sent to me by a publisher entitled Stuff South African White People Like. And in amongst sushi, braaiing, DJ Fresh and Madiba is the rhino. And the love of wild animals and their conservation in this country is really bound up in so many ways in many South Africans' minds with forced removals. You know, many black people see that their ancestors were moved off the land to make way for animals, and the animals perceived as being much more important than they. There must be some sort of way that people can be uplifted, educated, have a life without feeling that they're not as important as these animals.
Yes, Tamara. Look, that is a peculiarly South African approach. As you know, seems to be that we can't get any debate going in this country without it getting back to race. Rather like in England, you can't get any debate going without it coming back to class. I think we need to move on it. Yes, there were false removals. There were a lot of injustices in this country, particularly after the 1913 Native Land Act, where people were forced off their land. But that is what the whole restitution system that the government is running is supposed to put right. I think it's a historical issue. And and people who were pushed off, I mean, look, the government's just spent 1 billion rand buying Mala Mala, with 97,000 rands per hectare. I hope that will go back to the community ownership and not into the pockets of fat cats at the top of the government. Some of them certainly made enough money out of the deal. But, yeah, look, environmental tourism is a great producer of jobs. In and around, if you drive up that whole sort of western side of the Kruger National Park, but thousands and thousands of people are involved in either working in or working in businesses that are supplying, or the hotels and restaurants that are meeting this huge traffic of tourists in and out of the Kruger National Park. And that's a social plus, I would have thought. The problem when it comes to the poverty aspect is really over on the Mozambican side. And there, in those villages running from Massingiya down to Rosana Garcia, which is opposite Kamatiport, there's real poverty. And this is what, with the Focus Africa Foundation, was set up to help to raise funds to support President Joachim Chissano's foundation in Mozambique, which is orientating itself towards socially uplifting those areas as a solution, part solution to the problem of the poaching that has been launched from the Mozambican side, the soft underbelly, as it were, of the Kruger National Park. Social upliftment is very important on the Mozambican side. And also, you know, you've got to get the communities to believe that the preservation of wildlife is something that is good for them and not something that is only good for a rich American or British tourists.
Yeah. And I just wanted to touch on why Swaziland has little or no poaching, Nigel.
Yes, Tamara. Last Friday I was lucky enough to be invited, privileged enough to be invited by Ted and Liz Riley to the 50th anniversary of Great Game Parks. 50 years ago there was hardly any game left in Swaziland, and Ted inherited a farm from his father and decided that he was going to start conservation off in Swaziland. and he had the support of the king, and now they have 5 or 6 parks. It's remarkable that in the last 10 years they've only lost 3 rhinos, but there is an explanation for it. They had, at the end of the 80s, 89, 90, an outbreak of poaching of rhinos, and Ted got so upset that he got one of these slaughtered rhinos and took it up to the king's palace and dumped it on the doorstep. He was inevitably summoned by the king for an explanation, and what emerged from it was a meeting of minds, and legislation was introduced. Draconian legislation in some view, but anybody caught with a firearm in a royal park in Swaziland who doesn't surrender immediately will be shot. That's quite a message. Those who are captured, and the rangers there have powers of follow-up, so they can not only arrest, they can actually go to people's houses where they suspect smugglers are operating from, and they can break the door down and they can search the premises. But the legislation is the key. There are long sentences. There is no parole. And there is an extra sentence for not replacing the value of the animal that was killed. Police who lose dockets, which is very common here in South Africa, go to jail for 1 year. Prosecutors who fail to prosecute properly, also common here in South Africa, they go to jail up to 1 year. And the same for magistrates who don't deliver what is considered to be an appropriate sentence. And this is overseen from the King's office. There's an officer there who oversees this whole process. That is the secret. South Africa could do it if it wanted to, but it doesn't want to. Botswana is another example where, thanks to the President, Ian Khama, there is the military involved. There is really draconian consequences for the killing of animals. And just go back to Swaziland again, and you know, they teach the children in the schools the importance of wildlife. And you know, when Kingsley Holgate did his trip down the Lebombos, he started in Mozambique, and he had these little A3 sheets with an outline of a rhino, and it was sort of paint your vision, children, of the rhino. And there it starts with blood and AK-47s and dead rhinos. And then you get to Swaziland, and what the children were producing there were pictures of rhinos in the bush. Healthy. We love our rhinos. These are our national treasures. Okay. And then you get down to South Africa, and you get back to, this time it's guns, blood, helicopters.
Children's drawings?
Yeah, okay. and cops.
Now, the people who are on the receiving end of the rhino horn, Vietnam and China, what is the reason for them wanting this very expensive product?
Well, tomorrow, a recent report by Traffic raises the interesting point that it's Vietnam, not China, that's driving it. Historically, China has been a key market for rhino horn, but it's the growth that we've experienced in poaching in South Africa, which only started in about sort of 2007, coincides with quite an interesting parallel. China's economic growth, big burst for growth, started in about 1993, and that didn't feed through to poaching in South Africa. But Vietnam's growth started in about 2003. And there's another difference, or another point here which is quite interesting, which is whilst China's had about a 2,000-year history of using rhino horn as a traditional medicine, Vietnam hasn't. The demand for rhino horn there is a fashion for young people. 70% of Vietnam's population is under 35 years of age. And the demand is a trend, it's a fad. It's a fashion. It's a bit like a Rolex watch, or the black diamonds and their Johnny Walker Blue. It's to show that you've made it. They hand it out to ingratiate themselves, and they use it to celebrate deals that they've done, and they even grind it and add water and use it as a detox after boozing sessions at night. So it's a status symbol. There's obviously no health value, as there's nothing in rhino horn. It's as good as you might as well chew your toenails, and maybe we could get the Vietnamese to encourage their young people to chew their toenails rather than fork out $65,000 to $90,000 a kilo for South African rhino horn. So there it goes. I think it can be changed. I think the South African government, rather pussyfooting around, should get the Vietnamese ambassador in by the diplomatic scruff of the neck and tell him, unless his country gets the message that about the outrage in this country and globally over the killing of the rhinos, they're going to find themselves at the end of international sanctions.
Just last message from you, Nigel. Where are we heading, and how are we going to avoid it?
Well, Tamara, first of all, thank you for putting up with me for a whole hour. There are not many people in this world who would do it. Look, the picture looks grim. And unless the South African government starts waking up to this disaster that is approaching, and if it goes down the road of advocating as a solution an international trade in rhino horn, it's going to be seriously out of step with the international community. We're going to be back to another one of those AIDS moments where South Africa people scratch their heads and they say, what on earth is going on in their minds? Or, how can their Minister for Health turn up with garlic and beetroot at an international conference on AIDS? Well, look, with the world's the biggest herd of rhinos in the world, how on earth can the South African government seriously think about opening up a trade in their horns? It's not going to work, and it's going to lead to more corruption, and it's going to lead to more bad publicity for a country that does not need it. We need more good publicity in this country.
Nigel Morgan, thanks for coming into Classic Lifestyle.
It was a pleasure, Tamara.